Hi, my name is K.Thomas, W1DED. The contest crew is made up of four well-known ham radio contesters: Scott Wright, K0MD, Randy Thompson, K5ZD, Dan Craig, N6MJ, and Chris Hurlbut, KL9A. If you're a contester, you already know these guys and they need no introduction. If you're a newcomer, then just go to QRZ, 3830 scores, listen to my interviews with them, and I think you'll understand why they're here. What you won't see in those scores, though, is how approachable these guys are and how helpful they are to both old-timers and newcomers alike. If you can remember that first club meeting you went to, these are the guys that would get up and shake your hand and say hi. They're the type of guys that would invite you in the shack. They are the type of guys that would invite you to participate in a contest. And that's why they're here. These four individuals have agreed to do this every Monday night at 9 o'clock and try to provide some insight into contesting for us mere mortals that try to keep up with them. Randy, Chris, Scott, Dan, thank you for joining me tonight.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for having us.
I think the place I'd like to start is just to find out from the four of you what contests you've been in the last week. Scott, at least yourself, I think you've been participating in the Minnesota QSO party. Is that right?
That's right. We have that first weekend of February typically, and we always are hoping that it's, between -5 and -20 with lots of snow, so that makes for great photo ops. But this year it was spring-like weather with no bad weather, and, it was the warmest QSO party we've ever had with probably the best attendance we've ever seen in terms of participation.
I think in a future show, I'd like to talk more about QSO parties. I know that may not be everybody's thing, but I do hear a lot about it from a lot of the people I talk to, that they enjoy them, and they seem to be easy ways for a lot of us to get involved with contesting without the pressure of getting in the ARRL DX CW, which we'll talk about later on. And Randy, I believe you operated the RIDI contest this past weekend.
I did. The CQWPX RIDI was this weekend, and I really was trying not to operate too much because I want to spend all my time in ARRL next weekend. But for some reason, with all these contests, I start operating, and if conditions are really great and it's a lot of fun, then I can't stop. So I did low power, single op all band, worked a couple of thousand people, and just really had a great time. Nothing like sunspots to make contests more fun.
Randy, I read your summary, and I'm getting sick of these summaries from you that say, I went to the movies, I had lunch, I did some errands around town, and I had 5 million points. This seems to happen with you a lot. You have this very casual approach to the contest, and you end up doing incredibly well. And that's, again, why you're here, so that you can explain to us how that happens.
I was serious when I was on. I just didn't plan to be on the whole time. That's what happened.
Well, I think you operated 24 hours. Is that right?
Yes.
Well done. So I know all of your sights are set on next weekend with the ARRL DX CW contest. And for anybody who would like to know more about what these individuals have done, you should go to 3830 scores or just go directly to the ARRL, and you'll find some, not surprising, some champs here on the call tonight. Dan, I believe you operated from ZF1A last year?
Yeah, actually, I've operated from ZF1A the last 9 years consecutively, mostly in the multi-single category, and then one time I did single op. So this is going to be the first year where I'm actually not going down there.
And Randy, I think you had a second place score in your category last year.
I think so. I don't remember. But no, I'm it's a fun contest because the whole world looking for us. So it's always great. There's not as many countries active as, say, the worldwide, but that doesn't make it any less fun. So
well, I love the fact that you don't remember. I'll remind you, you came in second in your category last year.
Actually, I do remember I lost to a good friend of mine, K5GN in Texas, and in retrospect, just like I only had to operate like 2 or 3 more hours, and I could have prevented a Texan from winning a DX contest.
So let me give you a tip. Stop going to the movies and having lunch, and just keep your butt in the chair, okay?
Yeah, that's the problem. That, by the way, and I think the guys will agree to this, if you're going to do a contest, the reason we talk about serious and not serious, serious means you are showing up to do the contest. You are going to do the whole darn thing, because the worst thing in the world is doing the whole contest seriously and then losing because you took an extra hour of sleep or something like that. Whereas when you're not really trying, then it's like, okay, I can lose. It's all right.
Well, let's start there. Let's go around the room per se. Scott, are you putting in a serious effort in the CW contest this next weekend?
No, I've got to depart for an international trip on Sunday. So I'll probably operate 15 to 20 hours. I enjoy this contest. I've won the Dakota division the last couple of years doing it. My favorite thing to do is to be overseas, say in the Caribbean, and operate there back to the U.S. So yes, no, I will not be doing a serious effort. That's creating a lot of cognitive dissonance in my mind because I enjoy this contest and it's very addictive. It's like Randy. That's why he got sucked into the RTTY contest this past weekend. You get started and you can't stop because you're having so much fun. And that's how this contest will be. But, I've got to get packed up and my wife and I have to get the house shut down and hit the road. So it'll be less than 24 hours for me because I got to sleep a little bit too.
During the last show, Chris was talking about how the NAQP was one of his favorite, if not his favorite contest. I think I've got that right. Was that right, Chris?
Yeah, good enough. Yeah,
good enough. So, Scott, when you say it's a favorite, what makes this particular contest a favorite for you?
Kevin, that's a great question. I've been a student at Contest University, so. All three of these guys on the podcast with us tonight have taught me a lot. But, Doug Grant and Randy have lectured there year after year. And so early on, when I started going there, I set some contest goals. What's the purpose of my radio station, right? I was going to create a station that would be competitive in DX contesting and domestic, but with an emphasis on DX contesting, which is why I have stacks for 10 through 40 and a rotating tower and things like that. So I like this contest because my station plays to it pretty well from the upper Midwest. Randy can have a tri-bander in Massachusetts and still beat me 3-1 easily. But, from where we are, it's just plays to the strength of my station. And one of the things I enjoy the most is to get on and call CQ contest and then try to decide if I'm going to work the JA or the ZF or the PY or the Charlie Echo and occasionally hear Europe off the other side of the beam, and so I've been really just refining this station to make it more competitive for this kind of contest. It's really what I got. It's really what I like most about contesting. So it combines my pleasure, my interest in DXing and the fun of contesting. So that's why I like it. It's I love CW and it's quite relaxing. And, every Monday I go to work after a 48-hour CW contest. I am in a great mood and just delighted that I could spend the contest weekend doing it. So that's why.
Well, I appreciate that. And Dan, what about you? I'm sure serious because you're trying to qualify for the WRTC. Tell me what your plans are.
Yeah, I have a hard time not doing serious myself. I need to take some lessons from Randy in that, but definitely serious. I'm very lucky that I have access to the station. So I'm going to be at ND7K in Arizona, which is one of the biggest stations here on the West Coast. And he's allowing me to operate any contest I want this year for the qualifying process. And so I feel like whenever I take up an offer like that, I don't want to disappoint. So also for myself, I like to be competitive, but also I don't want to disappoint the station owner. So definitely going to be serious, planning on doing all 48. I have some goals in mind. I think I'm shooting for 5,000 Qs from W7. That would be kind of exciting. It's kind of a lofty goal. It might be more like 4,500. But instead of doing any contesting this past weekend, I spent the whole weekend actually preparing for next weekend. There's like three main things that I was doing. The first thing that I was doing to prepare was I have the log from ND7K last year. They did a multi-2 and they actually put up a very large score, 5,500 Qs or something like that. And so I've been going through that log over and over again, just trying to see what they worked, when they worked it, when the bands are open, when to run where. So that's the first thing. And then the other thing that I've been doing too is I'm very lucky that ND7K has an RBN, a skimmer basically. And so I can go on and see what he's hearing any hour of the day just by going to the reverse beacon network, typing in the ND7K as the spotter call, and I can see what bands are open at what time. And one thing that really came out of all of this that I wasn't aware of is there actually is a decent 20-meter opening into Europe between like 0800 Zulu and 1000 Zulu. And I could see in the log from last year that they worked a few guys during that time frame. So that already kind of piqued my interest. But now looking at the RBN spots, I can see that every night, right around that time, all of a sudden Europe starts coming in on 20, and it lasts for a couple hours and then fades away before sunrise. And that's one of those things that you might miss if you're not really paying attention. And it may or may not happen during the contest. You can't make any guarantees, but if it's going to happen, I'm going to be there and I'm going to be ready for it. So,
You're reminding me of an early conversation I had with Marty Sulloway, and he was saying the same thing when he prepared to go to ZF1A. He would look at logs and come up with a plan. I'm curious, do you actually write that plan out, or is it just in your head what the plan should be?
for me, it's mostly in my head. It basically, it's always going to be dependent on actual propagation that's happening on the radio. So I have lots of ideas in my mind of where I'm going to be at what time, but it's all dictated based on what's actually going to be happening on the radio. So for me, all in my mind, I think it's a good idea to write things down. I've actually been working with the ZF1A guys for both phone and CW, both teams, to write up a schedule for them so that they can, have an operator schedule ready to go. We talked a lot about propagation down there and what to expect. There's a few new operators going down there for those contests. So I've been spending a lot of time working with them as well.
And Chris, what about yourself? Serious effort?
Super serious. I'll be on 15 meters at K3LR with the famous K1DG. So yeah, anytime you go to K3LR, it's all business. So, we have the logs from last year. I've operated 15 meters there before on phone, but never on CW. So it should be a lot of fun. I haven't been in a while. I think it's my 22nd trip to K3LR. And the best part is, multi-ops are the best. Single ops, yeah, okay, they're fine. But multi-ops are my favorite. But the prep is totally different. Like Dan said, he's single point of failure. If he doesn't get the opening, nobody's going to. When you have two guys on a band and a multi-multi, you get a little bit of redundancy. But if we miss a single QSO, we're going to get booted for next time. So we don't want to get fired.
So I believe last year in 2023, K1LZ won that category, and took the plaque from K3LR. Is that discussed at all, how you can overcome that challenge of the K1LZ station?
I would say it's probably discussed at length all the time. I've operated from Maine remotely, but same thing. And when the bands are good, it's great. When the bands aren't good, it's not really the right place to be a lot of times. K3LR said a long time ago, I remember this vividly, he said you got to show up to win. So if you don't show up, you're never going to win. So you got to try every single time. And is K1LZ beatable? Of course, everyone's beatable. We're going to give it our best. It should be a lot of fun.
And Randy, we know it's a serious effort for you. What's your plan?
Well, I kind of hate having to operate a contest for WRTC qualifying, but it does put some extra pressure on. But I don't know, I'll probably try to do 36 hours or so, and all bands unassisted. Just try to run guys as much as possible. From New England, the strategy is pretty simple. It's like, is the band open to Europe? Then why aren't you there? There really isn't any other bands anything else that matters.
When I was looking at your comments somewhere, Randy, it may have been in QST or maybe ARRL, I think there were some comments on how great the propagation was last year, first of all, but also the participation was way up last year. I think up like 10%, over 5,300 logs. What do you attribute that to? Just because of sunspots and propagation?
Sunspot, there's nothing better than having a contest where 10 meters is open, which gets lots of people on. Then they get pretty, energized by doing the contest, which means then they go to 15, which is also pretty good or even better. And then they're like, well, I might as well work some more guys. So then they go to the other band. So it just gets people on and gets them to stay on more. Makes more of the world available. So that also makes it interesting for both sides. Yeah, and conditions last year were great across all the bands. That's the thing that oftentimes we get high sunspots, then the low bands are terrible. So what makes it really extraordinary is when all the bands are open. And that's what happened in WPX RTTY this weekend. All the bands were great. 80 was loud to Europe, 10 was loud to Europe. And the sunspot predictions and so on for next weekend are almost the same. So as long as things stay quiet, it'll be great.
Frank Donovan says that 4 weeks out and 1 week out from a contest, you can tell what the bands are going to be like. And the solar flux is over 200 right now. The A index is 4. And Randy's success this past weekend predicts next weekend will be just as good. So it's going to be one for the record books, I think.
Scott, could you tell us more about the indexes for people that don't understand what that is?
I'm probably the least knowledgeable about it. I look at the solar flux, and then the A index, I think, is the higher it is, the less likely 160 is going to be any good, or 80, right? And the more noise you're going to have. And the K index, if it's 2 or 3, the low bands are just lousy. But they one of them, the solar flux reflects really the charge of electrons in the atmosphere, I think, and then the others reflect the changes that are going up or down. So that's how I simplistically think about it. I have to look it up in the books if I want to talk about it. I can't really tell you anymore. Maybe someone else wants to comment.
As long as solar flux is high and A and K are low, that's my knowledge of it all. Because in the end, it doesn't really matter. It only matters what you can actually hear or work on the radio. So I don't pay that much attention to it. Unless things are really bad, then you might say, well, why are things so bad? And then you look at the numbers and go, oh, okay, it's bad.
So the strategy from where I am, if I want to do this seriously, I like to run, but you have to spend at least half your time working mults from the Midwest to have any hopes of getting a score above 2 million. I don't know what it's like in Montana or Arizona, but we just can't run, because where Randy is, the mults come to him. And when I'm in the Caribbean as a multi-single, the mults come to you, but everywhere else you have to find them and work them. So you got to have some intentionality every hour to run, and some intentionality about working the mults. And usually our contest group members who have the highest scores are the ones who methodically worked every mult on every band they could find, and then started running when they didn't have anyone else to work.
Now, Scott, will you be running SO2R so that you can get the mults on the second radio?
Yes. Once you start doing SO2R, you're totally bored doing single radio. So I have to do SO2R. I'm, checking email and looking at the sports if I'm not.
Yep. The F1 gets on repeat, and then you start watching TV or looking at your phone. By the way, we should point out, contests are inherently unfair due to geography and demographics. Not every, the middle of the country, it's unfortunate, but it's a little bit too far north, so it has to go through the Aurora a little bit, or both directions, Japan and to Europe. So you just never really have any great openings to the real population centers that it takes. And New England, of course, we have Europe all day, and then Arizona is going to have Japan a lot, so they'll have some ways to make up. But it's just it's a little bit unfair, and so as a result, you can't always compare scores on the national or continental level. You have to really kind of look at who the local people are and see how they're doing, and make sure you're doing well there first. Then you can worry about how you're comparing with other people far away.
Well, let's take it a little bit further, because, again, there are a lot of contesters, maybe at my level, that aren't going to get a plaque. How would you, Randy, suggest that they approach the coming weekend? Narrow it down to the state they're from, the region they're from?
Number one, and Dan mentioned this earlier, you got to have a goal. If you don't have a goal, then you're just entertaining yourself on the radio. You're talking to, you're working people. You're having a good time. Not that you're going to have a bad time, but if you want to have a good score, you need to have a goal. And one way to help set this goal is to go back and look at scores from the past and see, well, what are other people in my area doing? Maybe you start with what the records are, and then you kind of look at what people that have typically done. And that gives you some idea of kind of what to expect. And expectations are really important. If you set your expectations too high, then you get crushed somewhere in the middle when you're not keeping up. You set them too low, and then you think, oh, wow, great, I made it. And you quit after 24 hours, and then somebody else, tortoise in the hare thing kicks in, and some other guy beats you. So you want to try to see what people have done, and then try to pick something that your station you think will be able to take advantage of the propagation to match that score. But don't make it a hard goal. Just make it like, okay, I want to be first, or I want to be first in this division, or I want to have the most QSOs on this band, that kind of thing. What
are your thoughts, Randy, or anybody can take this, but in selecting a category? I mean, we talk a lot here about all band. Do any of you recommend somebody take a look at 10 meters, 15 meters, and doing just an entry in those categories, or QRP? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, this is why a goal is so important, right? If you just want to have fun, and you can pick any category, But if you really want to try to win something, then yeah, you should think about, well, what can my station do? What can my location offer? What is the record? But that said, single band is fantastic if you want to learn the propagation on a band. Like, I want to sit on this band all weekend. I want to hear it from when it opens all the way to when it closes. I want to see when things come in, when they don't, when people are loud, when they're not. And you hear a lot of really interesting things when you get to stay on a band the whole time. And especially in a multi like Chris is going to be doing at LR, those guys will vacuum up everything. A weird opening, strange, whatever anomalies happen, they'll find it. Whereas a single op, you're always trying to stay on the hot band. And so there's a lot of really cool stuff that happens not during prime time. And so a lot of times when I say I'm not serious, it's really code for, well, I'm not going to try to always be in the right place. Sometimes I'm going to go look for funds and stuff, openings that I wouldn't normally get a chance to experience.
Kevin, I think another goal that people should think about, if you're not, the three other guys on this tonight are all trying to qualify for WRTC. I'm really not, because I've taken a role with WRTC to try to raise money. So I don't have the time to try to qualify and do that. But I know a lot of guys contesting, and women too, who really want to make DXCC on a band, or who want to improve their challenge point totals. So there are lots of reasons to contest besides trying to place first in your division, your category, and things like that. And I think that's where setting some goals does come in, and help. And so there are other goals other than just trying to win or trying to place really high that may satisfy a ham's needs, and they can keep them focused and going. I think one thing I'd like to ask the other three guys, every Friday night of these contests, I start to ask myself, what is wrong with my station? Because it's so hard to work Europe or Asia. And I don't know if it's the East Coast wall or what it is, but then it seems like Saturday morning, the bands are just wide open for me. Does anyone else struggle on Friday night with rates and wondering what's going on with trying to break a pile up?
Not really.
Yeah, it's because you're in a multi-op. You would just go watch TV.
Just you.
Yeah.
You go first, Dan.
Yeah, I think we do have that issue from the West Coast, but that's one of the reasons. So just to give you a real quick insight into the ND7K station, when he originally started designing that station, he just wanted to put up a one tower station, focus on domestic contests. And I sat him down and had a serious conversation with him, like, hey, this is your forever station. Is that all that you want to be? Or do you want to also compete in DX contests? And so we had that conversation, because in order to compete in DX contests, you can't just have a couple tri-banders, at least from the West Coast. And so we ended up putting up 3 140-foot towers with stacks on 10, 15, and 20 to Europe and Japan. And that's to avoid the problem that Scott has. So that we're loud enough that we can actually have decent runs into Europe, even on bands like 40, and then we're super loud into Japan, because we went all out in that direction as well. So we have lots of options, but the only way that we're able to get there is by putting up these really large antennas. Because without that, then you're going to run into that problem that Scott has, where you just might not be able to run guys the way that you want. And then I'm sure Scott will agree with this. If that's the case, that's when you go tune around and work some multipliers and make cues that way. There's always one way or another to work guys, but it might not always be running.
So I'm going to give you a couple answers, Scott. Contests are, it's a long race. It's going to be 40 something hours, at least for us who are trying to be competitive. And so you approach the contest as it gets ready to start. You've got all this adrenaline, all this excitement, and all this hope. There's no other word for it. Of, wow, it's going to be great this weekend. I can't wait. I'm going to be working guys like crazy. And you get into the contest, and the first hour may be okay, but not often exactly what you'd hoped. And the second hour is okay. Start to get to be some transition, find out which band I can work people on. And by the end of the second hour, or sometime into the third hour, I'm usually like, can we be done now? Because it's just, but what it is, it's a little bit like trying to run a marathon. You don't come out of the marathon, you don't start a marathon at full out sprint. You need to warm up and get into it. And then you have to get into that thing where you're doing this repetitive thing over and over and over again, putting one foot in front of the other. And so what I find is if I can live through the first 6 hours or so, okay, now I'm in the contest condition. I'm warmed up. I just kind of keep going. I almost have to make myself take a nap if I'm going to on the first night. And you just keep going. And then it just becomes a deal where, okay, must not stop. Just it's just like a marathon. Do not stop. Just keep going, and it'll be over soon. When I was in high school, I had just a tri-bander at 30 feet and some wires. And I remember starting a DX contest, and I couldn't find anybody. It was hard to work people. The pileups, and it's because at the beginning of the contest, everybody needs everybody. So all the big guys are in there, and then, even no matter how fast somebody's able to run people, it just takes a while to kind of clear things out. And so it can be really frustrating for a smaller station the Friday night of a DX contest. And so sometimes all you can do is really, you know what, I'm going to quit and go watch TV for a while and wait for things to even out a little bit, and then come back later at night when maybe more people have gone to sleep, or just come back the next evening when there's a lot less competition for guys. It's sometimes that's just, you just can't overcome the fact that everybody, all the loud guys all need to work each other and get it out of the way before there's room for the rest of us.
I was not expecting that piece of advice. Get out of the chair and go go watch a movie.
Well, you can be frustrated. Well, it's true. If you want to absolutely maximize your score, you have to grind it out, even if it means 20 Qs an hour or whatever. But sometimes it's actually better to avoid some of the frustration and leave yourself in a position where you'll be more ready for when you can do more. And that's one of the reasons I sleep. That's one reason I sleep on the first night. We've gotten to the point where the rate is so important in the mornings into Europe that it's probably more productive to get a nap than it is to try to grind out time.
As a newcomer, I can't tell you how many times I've started a contest on Friday night and been so discouraged that I have just called it. And then I'll get up the next morning, I'll start working at it. And then by noontime, I regret quitting on Friday night because I'm finally in a routine. But that it's always been difficult for me to get started. And maybe for the same reason Scott's talking about. But by Saturday noontime, it starts to feel a lot better.
Yeah, I think you have to just gut through it. I find whatever I do on Friday night determines my final score. So I try to stay with it, but you have to manage expectations. I think that's what Randy's trying to say. And I think the other thing he's saying is you have to keep your head in the game. If you can't keep your head in the game, just stop and get refocused, rest, and get back in it. Because you have to be sharp. It's like flying an airplane or something else. You got to stay focused on this when you're doing it.
This is where the online scoreboard can both be great and be a real danger. It's great if you've done well, if you've gotten off to a good start and you're kind of near the top, you're like, okay, it becomes a pusher. But it's also very easy to get behind some of the guys who did have a hot start. Perhaps they're in a place that's got great band opening to Japan or Europe or something. So they get to run for the first 2 hours. So they work 300 or 400 guys, and suddenly you're like, wow, I'm getting clobbered. Get discouraged and quit. You need to pick people to watch on the scoreboard that you're competing with, whether it's the same size station or the same area that you're in, whatever. But don't let yourself get psyched out because somebody on the coast is way ahead.
Yeah, I think the other thing is you got to really make your numbers on the low bands the first night, because every contester is human. And the second night, people are tired. I know when we were operating from VP5, we tried to get every state we could on Friday night because there were states, like Nevada, that no one would show up on the second night. And you're not going to work them, if you don't get them the first night. We always used to play a game, too. Which station will work us first from the U.S., K3LR, W3LPL. And I used to time it. It took about 1:20 for one of the two to find us when we started CQing for the first time on a new band.
1:20?
Yeah.
That's a lot.
The second station guy.
Like 7 or 8 seconds.
Don't you wish, Chris?
Hey, we'll work on that next weekend. 1:20.
Yeah, it took a little while.
Man.
Chris, I'm really intrigued how a station like K3LR operates, how they prepare for a contest. I know they're going to have a lot of seasoned contesters like yourself. Do you all just show up and huddle, or are there conversations before you get there?
I think K3LR is probably a special case. Tim lives and breathes for 4 contests a year. So the prep work is continuous. So as an operator, you just show up. Everything's ready to go. There's been a couple of contests where, things have broken and whatever. He's probably got 12 or 15 spares of everything on hand, and they swap it out, and that's it. As an operator, you don't see much, but you're expected to show up and know your band and operate well with the other guys, and you're all business. And all business isn't right the words, but you're serious, and we pass a lot of mults. That's huge in multi, especially in ARRL when guys are pretty casual. You can convince them to move, and there's an art to it. It's a lot harder on CW than on phone. So as an K3LR op, you're very spoiled. There's no question, which is not the case at all multi. Sometimes you show up and you got a lot of work to do, and you're all tired before the contest because you climbing towers and fixing things and stuff like that. So we show up with the expectation that we prepared ahead of time because the station will be ready.
So what is that secret in how to move a mult?
I can't give away all the secrets.
That's what you're here for,
Chris.
There's
no secret.
That's what you signed up
for. There's no
for.
secret to it. But yeah, but a lot of it is, okay, so let's say, I don't know, TI7W calls you on 40 meters. First of all, TI7W would never call K3LR on 40 meters if they were serious, right? But it's a well-known station. You may or may not, the operator himself, is he going to be serious or not? Let's say you know that you need him on 160. Okay, it's probably the only station in Costa Rica you're going to work on 160. Even if it's the first 15 minutes of the contest, you try to move him, because if he's not serious, you're never going to get it. If, a guy gets on from, this happened, a guy gets on from the Vatican and he's part-time. Okay, well, you're going to move him. If he says no, he says no. So maybe you slow it down a little bit and you say, please. And if a lot of times they just don't reply, you might try again because maybe they're still there listening and they didn't quite get it. But when they get it, you get on the gab and you say, okay, hey, 20 meters, HV0A is going to be there right now. Listen for him. And if the 20-meter guy doesn't, acknowledge that, you lean over and you slap him or poke him in the side and say, hey, you need to get this guy. And then the 20-meter guy is expected to move him to the other bands that you need. And if you miss a pass, well, that's a demerit, and you're going to have to make up for it later. So passing is about call recognition too. You have to be able to know the guys you're moving are capable or not. And it can be a little tricky.
I just got one quick thing to add here. So one thing that we've started to do at ZF1A, this is like real high level stuff, but we might as well talk about that too. We actually have a file of call signs of people that we're aware of that have made queues on 160 in the past, and so we're able to access that file to make sure that the guys that we are moving, we know they have 160 capabilities, and that helps narrow down who we move and when we move them, because like Chris said, you have to have a knowledge of, first of all, is the band going to be open, and then second of all, does the guy even operate on that band? And it's hard to know that without actually being active, but we also have a database that we can pull from too.
I don't move stations. Yeah, on CW I don't know how to do it quickly. Right, I do on sideband, and most of the time they say I can't do 160, but I don't know what to send on CW that's concise enough to convey what I'm trying to say, because usually I get a bunch of question marks from the other station. I give up after two transmissions and just keep running.
Chris, what do you say on CW to keep it concise?
Basically, you send the exchange, you have the exchange, the contact is good. And then I would say, please, PSE, 14015 question mark. And then if they say, question mark in return, you might slow it down, ask them again. That works, most of the time. A lot of times they'll say no, or they'll say later, or, no antenna, or something like that. On phone, it's a little easier, like if guys want to move them to 80 meters, it's like, hey man, like at K3LR, the famous saying is, I have enough antenna for the both of us, please try. So a little bit difficult on CW, but you don't have to make it long and drawn out on CW. It'll work.
And Randy, I think you weighed in and get stepped on. What do you move mults at all?
Almost never. Mostly because if I'm doing a contest where I'm that serious, it's on CW, usually they call in when you're running and have a bunch of guys calling you, and it's just like, you know what, I just don't even want to go through the gyrations of number one asking and number two dealing with it while I'm still trying to run guys. It's better off just to keep making rate, because when you do the math, a multiplier is only worth 6 QSOs. So as a single op, often better off just make more Qs.
I would say that that's the case if you're going to run away with it. If you're competing against a guy like N6MJ who's going 48 hours and you don't move mults, he's going to beat you by 12 mults and 42 QSOs, and that is the difference. Ask me how I know.
Well, if he's going to do 48 hours, he's going to beat me anyway. So.
Randy, it raises the question. I know with at least Chris, and I think with Dan also, in previous conversations, they've told me that they prefer multi-op. You typically don't do multi-op. I don't know if you've ever done multi-op. Have you?
I've done plenty of them. Did worldwide phone multi-single with Chris in N2NT. But I don't really do multi-multis because I don't like being stuck on one band. I love multi-single with 2 or 3 guys where you get lots of operating, get to listen to all the bands, you get to run some, you get to tune around some. It's more fun than single op. But also, I built a station, and every time I talk about going somewhere, my wife would go, "Why are you going somewhere? You built a station." So I'm kind of limited.
I enjoy it. I've never done a multi-multi. I've really enjoyed multi-single. I've been a team member when we placed number 1 in the world from the Caribbean, and then also a team leader where we didn't quite do that well. It's just, if you have the right people with you, they're friends, you just have a lot of fun, both inside the contest time and outside the contest time. I've not done a multi-single or multi-two at my station in a while, largely because the guys I usually invite over will come over as a courtesy and operate, and then they go home and operate their own station. So I call them double dipping. And so I want people to focus to work this station. You know, could you imagine K3LR if Chris tried to break away for 6 hours to operate? It'd be a big demerit, wouldn't it, Chris?
Yes, it would.
I know you guys paid a lot of attention to what other operators do and what other stations are doing. And I'm just curious what you may have heard K1LZ is doing in 2024. I know last year the big conversation was that they were, I think, 100% remote for the contest versus K3LR that was 100% in person. Have you heard what their plan is for 2024?
About K1LZ, honestly, I have no idea.
I assume, like everything Crassi does, it will be 100% full power with a whole bunch of guys, and they're pushing to win. He has some of the coolest technology I've heard of. Certainly some plenty big antennas, there's no question there. But the technology behind that station is super cool. I mean, it's way above my skill set. So I don't know what they're doing. I just always assume it's something super serious, and they always are the people to beat, which is super cool too.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything. Usually they're out hustling for people, so they must have a crew in place, or I assume they're going to go multi-op, but you never know.
Now, Randy, I know that you're part of the Yankee Clipper Contest Club. Does that play any role in what you do during a contest, or are you really operating for yourself and your points go toward the club? And I'd extend this question to everybody else. Are you working toward a club total also, or is that just a secondary?
I operate for my own personal satisfaction and goals. I'm glad to contribute a score to the club, and it's always fun when the club listings come out and see how I did. But it's a club that it tries to focus on the total score of the membership, not so much what each individual member is doing in the middle of it.
You know, I'm not really a member of a club. You know, we have Big Sky Contesters, which is a loose group of guys, but I do follow the Spokane DX Association guys because the company I work for is based in Spokane, so I know a lot of them, and I go to the meetings, and they're a bunch of great guys. And last weekend in the WPX RTTY contest, they posted to the live scores, and you can sort by club, and they had a nice banter back and forth between the club guys and each other on the live scores. And there was 2 multi-single low powers in the club going against each other. And I found myself at work watching the scoreboard to see how the guys were doing. So it's cool that the clubs are getting activity up. Those guys were looking for extra, new DXCCs. They were looking at competing with their buddies. And the competition was very local. and it certainly kept them in the chair longer. But while also helping get them, get their skills up and everything. So it was kind of a nice culmination of everything we've talked about for how to keep things local, set a goal, compete with your friends, the live scoreboard. I see it every weekend with these guys, and it's really cool. It's not something that I have anybody around here to do with, but I think that it's definitely working the way it's supposed to.
I would say from our club, the Minnesota Wireless Association, we have an intra-club competition. So we divide the membership into half, depending on your geography, and then the winners pay less for the annual meeting dinner than the losers. It's like 3-to-1 differential. And then within our own team, we have a text group that we text throughout the contest to keep each other awake, keep each other going. And then we also have been setting up a private scoreboard on Contest Scoreboard online, so we can watch each other and see how one another's doing. And that's kept a lot of guys in the seat. My scores get broadcast out nationally or whatever to everyone, but even when I'm using the private scoreboard, but I do find it helpful. And if those guys start gaining on me, in the last CQ Worldwide I did, I think I tried to stay 200 or 300 ahead of some of them. And when they would get closer, I'd intensify like Randy talks about and just put the pedal to the metal. And it was good for me. It's good for them. So we find that it helps each other stay committed, because we know that even in the zero call district, the propagation in Kansas and Missouri is so much better than in Minnesota that you can't compare. And even, W0AIH had a station in Wisconsin about the same latitude as mine. And I used to talk with W9RE about it, and Mike would say, Paul maybe had better antennas or equal antennas, but Mike could always outperform him just because of latitude. And so I think you have to do the things to keep you going. And sometimes it's intra-club competition and sometimes it's national, but it works, and so we share the points and use it to try to promote our club too.
Yeah, so actually I'm a member of two different clubs. One here in Southern California, which is the Southern California Contest Club. And then also when I'm in Arizona, there's the Arizona Outlaw Contest Club out there. And there's a big difference between the two clubs. And I love my SCCC. I've been contributing scores to them for 30 plus years. But there's not a lot of activity on the reflector. Not a whole lot of guys are encouraging other guys to get on. And it makes a difference, because now when you look at the Arizona Outlaw Contest Club, their reflector, every contest that comes up, there's somebody promoting it, begging guys to get on. And there's so many guys on from Arizona now because of that club. And I think it's a big thing. And so I find myself, when I'm in Arizona, it makes me excited to be part of that because they are so active, and they really do care when the big score comes out. And then when it comes to the SCCC, and again, no disrespect whatsoever, but it's a little bit different because you don't hear a whole lot from anybody. It's pretty quiet. So I think having a very active club makes a really big difference in your local area.
Well, I see we're approaching 10 o'clock, and I know at least Randy must be a little bit tired after his non-serious effort this past weekend. So we probably should wrap up. Are there any final tips that anyone would like to offer for contesters next weekend?
Don't work. If you're in the USA, don't work in the USA, guys.
Good
Okay,
tip.
one last tip. Have fun, get on, work guys, and have fun. Have fun. It'll be good.
You cannot let these high sunspot years pass. You got to take advantage of them. You're going to work people, and you're going to hear stuff that you just 3 years ago would not have believed. So take advantage of it, because 3 years from now it'll start to go back down again, and we'll all be sad.
I would say spend a lot of time on 10 and 15 meters, because it's very rare that those bands are open wonderfully, and this is the time to do it. And I may spend most of my time on Saturday on 10 and 15 because my antenna is actually my strength. So my antennas are on those two bands.
And 10 meters almost has equivalent infinite space. So you can find a frequency and call CQ, and the RBNs will spot you, or the skimmers will find you and spot you. So get on it. Don't be afraid to call CQ.
Well, gentlemen, I appreciate you showing up tonight. I enjoyed hanging out with you. Look forward to seeing you next Monday at 9 o'clock for the recap of how the weekend went. Have a good night.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, good night.